As I said in my previous video on UV mapping, the one that I settled on was not going to be my final version because it was sloppy, I felt. So, in line with some other projects, I decided to clean it up, organizing the parts of the interior and different parts of the UV map so that it's easier to tell what's what. This involved a certain amount of experimentation because actually it's difficult to tell, for example, which side a particular part is on when you have a symmetrical or semi-symmetrical model with a lot of duplication and so on. This is a much simplified video of my cleanup because in all it took me about 2 hours 20 minutes of work, roughly. And I decided originally to edit this down to 10 minutes, and now I've had to settle for 20 minutes, so 2 10-minute parts. So as you can see, I am putting, or maybe you can't see, I'm putting together the UV map for the seats, which is really 2 sets of parts, of course, symmetrical. And I'm selecting the vertices on the UV map with the right click, much like on the actual model. One thing that I discovered in later experimentation is you can greatly speed up your workflow if you use the Control-L key combination to select all linked vertices. So here I'm trying to line up the different parts of the seat to the extent I can. I mean, obviously it's a 3D object, so you can't get a perfect match on the UV map, but it helps to get something that's an approximation so that you can navigate, essentially. So here I'm trying to line up the vertices for the sides with the seat, if that's the right word when you're talking about a seat. I also discovered a lot of extra parts in these seats that were internal to the model, which I had no plans on actually having, but I missed when I made the initial model, which was actually a number of years ago because these seats are borrowed from my C3 Corvette interior, actually. I think I mentioned that in an earlier video. Here, getting the sides of the seats, which turn out on the UV map to be in 2 pieces. I wanted to have the correct UV map parts on the correct sides of the seats. But the only way to find that was to experiment, because I found that when you unwrap a UV map in its entirety, there seemed to be very little logic in terms of what goes where on the UV map, which is one of the arguments for doing exactly what I'm doing here, which is to organize it to make it logical after it's been unwrapped. This is a little bit of a mess, as you can see, so I spent a few seconds figuring out what I was going to do. So the rear of the bottom cushion, the back of the seat, the top of the seat, I'm trying to line all of that up to the extent that I can. And this is where I discovered, where my extra faces were internal to the model, which I didn't want. Although I didn't fix them immediately either. As you can see, I'm trying to organize what I know belongs. So the sides of the seat there. Top of the bottom cushion, or the seat of the seat, as I was referring to it earlier. Plus the back, the front back. Again, confusing language. I can't think of better wording for that. Now, these are the extra faces that I don't really want to map because they're useless. So I'm using the wireframe view in the 3D editor, 3D view, to select those faces and delete them. The way the current version of Blender works, this is a common problem because sometimes it's very hard to get faces on a model generated without generating internal faces like this, which, in addition to eating up your bandwidth, also create complications like this. I'm trying to narrow it down to the faces I actually want here for the top of the seat. Basically the headrest, essentially. Real-life Corvettes had a few different options in this regard in terms of trim, depending on the seat type. 68 Corvettes actually didn't have any headrest at all, standard. It only became standard in 1969. But here I'm using them for the Vega for lack of a better example of a model that I can do easily. And my understanding is, regardless of whether or not Chevrolet used the same seats for the Corvette and the Vega, a lot of Vegas have subsequently been given Corvette seats because they're much easier to find in the aftermarket than a lot of other bucket seats that look like the correct time period. And so my end model is in a sense accurate because it represents what a Vega might look like on the street. But here I'm definitely admitting my ignorance as to all the details of the Vega interior, because sources, at least on the internet, are somewhat limited. If I could get my hands on a Haynes manual, it might be a little bit better, especially for measurements. Full blueprints would be even better than that, but those are also very hard to find. So sides of the seats here, but in this case the back seat, or the pair of sort of buckets, sort of bench seats. It's one seat, but it isn't, if you've seen pictures of the back seat in the Vega, which definitely was not used in the Corvette because over its entire history, the Corvette has been a two-seater. It's never had a back seat from the factory, whereas the Vega always had a back seat from the factory. So piecing together the back seat here. I had to make a few goes at this because it wasn't entirely clear which face was what, just at a glance. So more than one attempt at getting them aligned here. As I said, I wasn't completely sure in the beginning how these were supposed to fit. Bottom cushion, the seat of the seat, if that's the right word. I'm suspicious of the scaling on it too. I'm not sure if that's really correct either. But anyway, I'm close to the end of the video here, first part, really part 10 overall. And I will soon, I see I'm lining the seat models up there, but I will be right back with the second part of this.